Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be diving into the massive impact that the new Uber Keystones are going to have on endgame boss farming and the economy as a whole. So if you're planning on farming bosses in 3.18 or you need any of the drops from them, this is the video for you. But first, if you haven't already and you enjoy the content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. It seriously helps me out. But without further ado, let's dive into it. Alright, so the first thing to consider is that all of the pinnacle bosses are getting a new unique added to their drop table, with the exception of Cortex. In the previous league, we had the community boss kill event, and the winners of that got to design uniques for this league, and those are all being added to the standard drop table for each and every one of the bosses in the endgame. Now, these are nothing to do with the Uber versions, but they are going to have a massive impact on how these bosses are going to be seen in the eyes of the economy. Adding a new unique to all of their drop tables could improve the value of killing that boss for currency, or dilute the drop table and make them worse. It's going to be interesting to dissect and discern whether or not it's going to be an improvement or a decrease for each of the bosses. Next up, we of course have the new Uber Keystones themselves. Each of these Keystones upon activation is going to give you an economic bonus for slaying that boss on a harder difficulty, guaranteed. Now, this is pretty interesting though, because you're going to have two ways to defeat the boss. The standard version, which is going to give you your normal rewards with the changes to the drop table, but also the Uber version, which is going to give you guaranteed better rewards and a potential chance at a chase unique, which we'll talk about in a second here. And both of them use the same entry key, which will cost the same amount, creating a world in which the players doing the Uber version are just making more profit. Who will have control over the price of the keys? Will it be the players farming the Uber versions, or will it be the players mass farming the lower and easier versions? Well, we'll have to discuss that in a little bit. But lastly, the main change is going to be the new Uber chase uniques that are getting added to each and every one of the 7 Uber pinnacle bosses. And it's fair to say these are on another power level altogether, and are going to be extremely powerful when placed in the right build in the hands of the right player. So those are the changes. Let's dive into the analysis. There are 7 bosses getting the Uber Keystone treatment: the Shaper, Uber Eldar, Exarch, Eater of Worlds, Maven, Cortex, and Sirus. Now, of course, a big part to understanding how worth it an Uber version is and how much of an impact it's going to have is the uniques that they drop from their Uber variations. Now, in order to assess this, I'm going to kind of come up with a little bit of a guessing game here on how much I think they'll be worth in the softcore trade economy. So they're going to be low, medium, high, or extremely high on the value side of things. Obviously, we don't have full information about these, and we won't know for sure until we play with them, but I think I've got a pretty good idea of what they might be at in the end. So first up on the docket here is the Shaper, and his additional base drop is Echoes of Creation, the lightly designed slam helmet. So this helmet is certainly probably not going to have too much demand, as the slam archetype isn't very popular on the softcore trade league, unless a new build comes out which is a very powerful league starter or a super powerful boss as a second build. I'm going to rank this one on the low value side, and as such it's actually going to dilute Shaper's value in terms of his unique drop pool, overall making Shaper a little bit less valuable to farm on his standard setting. His keystone is currently unknown. We don't know what the bonus is going to be, but his Uber drop is Sublime Vision. So Sublime Vision is a new Watcher's Eye-esque unique that obviously comes from the Uber Shaper. Now we see here a fairly weak version of the Sublime Visions, the Wrath version. So the Wrath version obviously gives you a bunch of aura effect, but limits you to only using the Wrath aura. But it gives you in return the ability to sap all enemies on hit, which is the alternative lightning ailment. Now, there is obviously a few different alternative ailments. For cold, you have brittle, and for fire, you have scorch. I'm going to assume there's at least the 3 elemental versions of these auras, and just taking into account the hatred brittle version, it's already going to be a high value item. And the reason for this is brittle is already in the meta, people use it, and just sacrificing some auras to get brittle more consistently and only at the cost of a jewel socket absolutely will be on people's mind and something that they want to pick up. So if it's even just the 3 elemental auras, I'm going to rank this high, but it has potential to move into the extremely high version of the kind of pricing here if it has stuff like malevolence, pride, determination, grace, or any of these kind of auras as well, as there's a considerably large amount of builds that only use malevolence, for example, or only use pride, and this would absolutely be a massive item and a massive upgrade for them if there is chase mods on those aura variations. So I'm going to rank it high, but with the potential of extremely high. So we don't know Shaper's Keystone yet, but it's fair to say his base version's taking a bit of a hit, but his Uber drop is incredibly powerful and something people are definitely going to want to have if there is good mods on the other auras. Next, Uber Elder. So we don't know much about Uber Elder. We don't know his Uber Keystone effect, and we don't know his Uber drop. Some people are theorizing it's a 4 mod watches either. Ooh, that would be pretty powerful. But we do know his additional base drop, and that additional base drop is Call of the Void, the new chill shattering with defensive benefits. So overall, this is going to be a build around item. Someone is going to have to come in, see the item, and create a build around it, or a build that is enabled by it for it to really be valuable. Overall, I think it's probably going to be a middle of the range value item, and I think most of the value is going to come from its defensive options, its potential to work with self-chill builds if people want to go down that avenue, or its potential to be really good for consistent Herald of Ice shattering builds and kind of function as a pseudo explode. Now, all of these things have potential, but we don't know, and we don't have any people coming out with big crazy ideas and builds for this ring just yet, so it's probably going to be a mid-tier ring. It has the potential to drift into lower value or higher value based on what people do with it, but I think overall it's going to be a bit of a net neutral for Uber Elder's base drop pool, but you certainly will have less chance at getting something like an Eternity Shroud, I think, overall. And the rest of Uber Elder is a pretty big mystery. We don't know what his Uber drop is, and we don't know what his keystone is. The Searing Exarch is up next. So the Searing Exarch gets a base drop, which is actually shared with the Eater of Worlds. So this base drop is, of course, an amulet. It had to be an amulet. So already it's in massive danger of being irrelevant due to the fact that Omniscience, Ashes of the Stars, stuff like Yoke of Suffering, +2 amulets, these all exist and are incredibly powerful. So this amulet right out of the gate needs to be insane if it wants to have any shot of being relevant. And it is pretty insane, I'll be honest. It has a chance to have Cull if you go for an Eater of Worlds version of it, or it has a chance to give you, I think, a bit of damage reduction if you go with the Exarch version of it. So a bit of flexibility there, I like it. But the big catch to this amulet is that it is the first amulet with Eldritch implicits, and we don't really know how they work yet. What kind of a pool they'll have, or how you get them, can you reroll them, we don't know yet. So there is big potential for niche uses for this amulet, but I don't think it's going to see widespread use, as there's just such massive juggernauts in this slot. I think overall I'm going to value it at medium value, with the potential to be high if you get a really good one with really desirable implicits, and really low if you get really bad implicits and can't re-roll them. So it's a bit all over the place, but I imagine it's probably going to be a nerf to both the Exarch and Eater of Worlds drop table, as that could have been an Omniscience, or it could have been an Ashes of the Stars that you got instead. Overall, I don't think it's a big deal, but I think that these amulets won't be super expensive, except for ones with very specific implicit modifiers. Alright, the keystone for the Searing Exarch is 50% chance for a Eldritch currency to be duplicated. So part of this patch is GGG buffing the chance of getting Eldritch Ichors and Embers, as well as Eldritch currencies from all 4 of the Eldritch bosses. So this is actually a pretty big deal. This keystone is basically 50% more Eldritch Embers and 50% more Eldritch currency from the boss, which is actually just 1.5 times loot, which is pretty damn crazy if you ask me. So if you have people running it, you're gonna have 1.5 times loot, excluding any uniques you get from Exarch, which is definitely a massively enticing reward, and it's definitely gonna separate the people doing it normally and the people doing it uber, which is definitely a pretty big carrot on a stick here. Now, the Uber drop for Exarch is an exclusive Forbidden Flame with ascendancies that don't exist anywhere else. So we only know one of these ascendancies so far though, and it is entirely defensive. It's possible that it is build enabling potentially, but we don't know about the rest of them. How many other ascendancies they're going to be, we don't know. Are they going to be powerful? We don't know. Overall, if there's any transformative or offense-based ones, I think it's fair to say that this will be an incredibly chase unique, in which case I would rank it very high. But in the current iteration of it, I would probably just rank it high, as I think there will be people wanting it for its defensive capabilities and potentially some shenanigans with something like a ward loop build. But overall, I don't think it's insane. But I think that if there is any transformative or offensive-based ones, it will be insane. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's high value right now. Certainly an enticing reward for doing the Uber variation, and something that I would look into doing as long as it's not a massive demanding encounter. Similar to Searing Exarch, we have the Eater of Worlds. We have his Uber drop being the other half of the Forbidden Flame, the Forbidden Flesh, and we have his base drop being the Eternal Struggle, but with Eater of Worlds as its dominant influence. Now the difference is that his keystone is significantly worse. Instead of 50% chance to double all of the Eldritch currency, it's just a 25% chance at an additional T4 Ichor, which is actually just far, far worse than the Exarch counterpart. So overall, it's definitely going to be good, similar to everything I just said about Exarch, but it will be a little bit worse than farming Exarch because you don't get all of the juicy Eldritch currency duplication. Maven, perhaps the most buffed boss in terms of loot in history. Alright, let's start out with a base drop that's getting added, courtesy of Steel Mage. So the Impossible Escape is getting added to the Maven's base drop table, and it's a Watcher's Eye-esque item which allows you to jump all over the passive skill tree. So this is the first item I would guarantee 100% rank extremely valuable. There's no doubt that this item will be wanted by every single player on every single build without exception. It is absolutely got a place for everyone and every build. So overall, it's going to be basically down to, can you get a good one? Well, there's just so many good ones that the answer is probably going to be yes. And the fact that it's from the base drop table warps the value of this boss considerably to being one of the best bosses to farm. She now has the best gems, some really good uniques, and some of the best crafting materials, and now one of the best chase items. Are you kidding me? Maven is insane. It couldn't get better than this, right? Wrong. Her keystone mod is really, really crazy. So previously she has, a 15 or 20% chance, something like that, to drop an elevated sextant. Now these have kind of been annoying to sell historically because you never have a lot of them and lots of people don't want to buy them in singulars or all sorts of stuff like that. So you need to farm 200 Mavens to get any amount of them which someone would actually want to buy. The Keystone mod guarantees that every Maven you kill on Uber mode drops an elevated sextant, opening the market up to people bulk buying elevated sextants off you, but also you being able to have tons to sell to other people. Well, that is a completely different ballgame, and these things are going to fly off the shelf. There is no doubt. Overall, I think this is probably the biggest keystone we've seen so far on any of the Uber bosses, and it's guaranteed. It's not a chance, it's 100% chance you're getting a refund on a portion of your Maven key, which is really going to set apart the people doing Uber and the people doing normal, because the people doing Uber can just take the cost of the elevated sextant off of the key as just free money, which is definitely going to have a massive impact on the price of the Maven keys. Well, let's get on to the Uber drop for Maven then, because it can't get better than this, right? Well, wrong again. She has, again, one of the best Uber drops out of all the bosses we've seen so far. You can get Awaken, Enlighten, Enhance, or Empower. Again, these are going to be extremely valuable without a doubt. Enhance, not so much, but Empower and Enlighten, extremely valuable. Every build is going to want one or the other of these, at least I would say, and overall they're going to be absolutely insane, as lots of builds when they get to the hyper end game just want to push out one extra 50% aura, as it's another more multiplier, and Awaken Enlighten just gets more and more powerful the more levels you get onto it. Empower similarly is just more damage, so everyone's going to want that on their spellcasters. Overall, crazy chance that this is going to be one of the best bosses to farm on Uber mode, but overall, Maven, without a doubt, insane. Second last on the list here we have Cortex. So Cortex is a bit of a funny one. We don't know its additional base drop, or if it's even having one anyway. We don't know what its Uber drop is either, and that is a lot of the value from activating the Uber Keystone, but we do know its Uber Keystone overall. So its Keystone mod is that it drops 3 additional synthesized items with less common outcomes. So less common generally means that the outcome is rolled twice, and it gives you the better one. Now the catch is with Uber Cortex is that the area is going to be 85, and 85 items generally are going to be worth more than 83, and bosses generally drop their loot at 2 levels higher than the zone, meaning these synthesized items with less common outcomes could potentially be item level 87, allowing for the most powerful items to be crafted with these bases, which is actually a really big deal. For example, if you got a bow with +1 arrow or plus, like deck stacking or something like that, and then you got it on an 86 or 87 base, that's a massive deal. And overall, I think Cortex is going to derive a lot of value in its Uber mode from getting these additional synthesized items. It's definitely a nice bonus. I don't think it's going to tip everyone over the edge to doing Uber Cortex, and I do think with the way things currently stand, not knowing the Uber drop, Cortex probably still will just be feared food overall, but I think it is definitely, for people who can do it, will be a benefit, but I don't think it's going to be a massive differentiating factor as it currently stands. It's not like the elevated sextant where you feel bad if you're not running it. It's definitely going to be good, but whether or not it's going to be broken is another thing altogether. We need to see that Uber drop. Lastly, we had Sirus. Sirus's additional base drop is the Burden of Truth, a really defensive belt which has some similarities to some other uniques already in the game that allow you to go hybrid, energy, shield, and life. Now it's important to note this is a belt. Similar to how amulets went down earlier in the video, belts are a very competitive slot. We have Headhunter, Mageblood, and Stygian Vices all as incredibly compelling options. Most likely this belt will be competing with the Stygian Vice, and overall I'm not sure it can match up against that. Overall, it's going to come down to a similar story as the earlier Chill Ring. Is there going to be a build or a defensive profile of character that needs to rely on this belt? Potentially, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. However, on softcore trade, it's going to be probably very difficult to justify having this on any kind of endgame build. It's possible it may see a lot of use at League start, but as for a late game endgame item, it's probably not going to have a whole lot of value from what I can see right now. Hopefully someone proves me wrong, maybe some Forbidden Rite build can use it, but overall I expect this to be a low value item in Sirus's base drop pool, which overall will dilute his unique drop pool. Next up, his Keystone. 20% chance to drop an Awakened support gem. So we don't know if this is an additional 20% chance or a like kind of subsequent 20% chance, we don't know overall, but it is just going to be an increase seemingly to his chance to drop an Awakened support gem, which is pretty welcome, and is definitely going to differentiate the people running normal and Uber Sirus. Now, is this going to be a massive deal breaker? Most likely not. It's not something like the Elevated Sextant, which is going to absolutely tip things massively in the other scale. It's not something like the Eldritch Currency Duplication, but it is definitely something to consider, and over like 20 or 30 Sirus kills, you probably will get significantly more loot. Whether that'll warp the market is another story though. The Uber drop for Sirus is a massive thread of hope. So instead of a small, medium, or large radius thread of hope, you get a massive one. Now, is this worth any more than a normal thread of hope? We honestly have no idea. Now, a lot of the value of thread of hope comes from the fact that you can get an easily double corrupted one with the divination card. You can get like corrupted blood, your mana reservation efficiency, or all sorts of other things like that. Now, are you willing to give up that for the massive one? Well, I'm not entirely sure about that. So the massive one would essentially need you to make some game-breaking jumps across the tree to get certain specific passives. However, we've already talked about an item like that in the Impossible Escape from Maven, so I'm not entirely sure how much utility the massive thread of hope is going to get, or if it really deserves to be a Uber drop. However, I think it is definitely an interesting item, and its potential, it could be really valuable if someone finds a very specific use for it. Overall though, Sirus Uber version is a little bit underwhelming, I'll be honest. Unless that 20% chance to drop an Awakened support gem is some sort of massive leap in his profitability, I think people may actually end up sticking to normal Sirus, but we'll just have to see how that all turns out and what people are looking for from these bosses. Alright, so now that we know all of the changes to the bosses, how is this gonna shake things up? Well, it's clear that some of the Uber bosses are worth way more than other Uber bosses. So for example, compare the Sirus Uber unique to something like the Maven Uber uniques. It's just not even close. Some of the bosses are just far more lucrative to run on the Uber versions than others. And of course, the Keystones are no exception to that either. So the question is really going to be down to how much more worth it is it. It's no doubt that these Uber bosses are going to take longer and be far more demanding of your character. So if it takes you twice as long to run an Uber boss and the margin or the increase in profit is only like 5%, you're probably not going to do the Uber version of it, are you? But in case of Maven, if it's like twice as much money you're earning, well, of course you're going to want to do the Uber version of it and run it every single time. That's going to be point number one. How fast is it to do, and is it going to be financially worth it? Now, with those answered, in the future, we're going to be coming to a very interesting crossroad, and that is going to be people running normal versus people running Uber. Obviously, there's a limited supply of all of these keys, and both of those groups of players use the same amount of keys. Let's use Maven for an example. The Uber players are getting a free Elevated Sextant guaranteed every run, and they're also getting a chance at probably what's going to be a 20 or 30x chase gem in the form of Awaken, Empower, and Enlighten. Now, overall, that's a massive swing in the economy, and it's probably going to give the power of those Uber players to, price out all of the normal Maven farmers. As long as they're able to consume them at a reasonable rate, and there's not an inundation of Maven keys, the control of that content probably will lie firmly in the camp of the Uber farmers, as they just have such an economic advantage over the people running the normal variant. Now, when it comes to something like Sirus though, where the only real economic advantage that we can see so far, pending any massive prices on the massive thread of hope, is that it's just you get a higher chance at an Awakened gem. We don't even know how much higher that chance is. Well, overall, that's probably not going to make a world of difference. It might be, 5-10% increased profit over 100 runs or something like that. In that case, there's not a massive difference, and it might not even be worth to run the Uber version in that scenario. Overall, it might be better to run the normal version. So you're probably going to kind of enter a scenario in which there's the absolutely you have to run the Uber version, and if you're not, you're trolling, and if you use the key not on Uber, it's a joke, and if you run the normal version, it's like, why would you ever run the Uber version? That's such a waste of time. It's probably going to be those two extreme camps for each of the different bosses. Now, this is all pending how hard they're going to be though. If the Uber bosses are a joke, you're just going to run every single one on Uber anyway. But if they're all going to be super duper hard, it's really going to come down to what I just said. Now, obviously, Maven is the extreme example of super profitable, and Sirus is the example of super not that profitable. Now, it's going to come down to stuff like the Exarch, Eater of Worlds, and all sorts of stuff like that in between. The player base is going to have to understand and decide how much more worth it is to run on Uber, and that is what's going to end up warping and changing the metagame around these bosses. From what I can see, though, it is going to change, and there is going to be some extreme bias towards only Uber versions on some of these bosses. And it's also worth noting, we don't know all the drops yet. There could be some absolutely ballistic stuff on Cortex and such, and there's also a ton of other moving parts going on as well with other keystones on the Atlas passive tree. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and got a little bit of inside intel on the new endgame bosses and how it might shake out. Definitely keep an eye on the price of the keys that you're running, as it might not always be worth it to run on normal mode, and the prices may be centric around the Uber version. But also keep in mind that is that Uber version actually worth your time to run? Make sure you do the math and figure it out. Until next time, cheers.